That's right. Another first for the John F. Kennedy School of Government. I'm Albert Carnesale, Dean of the school, and it's my great honor and pleasure to welcome all of you this evening. We really have a delightful evening ahead of us with some people that have a great deal to say and mean a great deal to this institution and to the people in this audience. My introductions will be very, very brief because you'd rather hear from them than from me. And my introductions will focus naturally on the important part of these people's accomplishments, namely their connection to this university. Now, our first speaker, first to mention the reasonable parts that I guess you have to mention in any standard introduction just so they're not entirely overlooked. He's the governor of the state of Massachusetts, former U.S. attorney from Massachusetts, before that an assistant attorney general of the United States in the criminal division in the U.S. Justice Department. But for the important part, Harvard College, class of 1968. A brief respite from hard work at Oxford University, and then back to Harvard Law School in the class of 1970. Perhaps more important, has taught study group in the Institute of Politics here at the John F. Kennedy School of Government, and is now working with our Center for Business and Government on telecommunications policy. Kidding aside, it's my great privilege to introduce the Governor of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Bill Weld.
Thank you very much, Dean. I'm honored to be here with you, with the Prime Minister, whom I consider a good friend, with Senator Kennedy. The Prime Minister is one of my idols worldwide, along with President Salinas of Mexico and Prime Minister Klaus of the Czech Republic. He's one of the three people I know who's more conservative than Milton Friedman, and all of them are running countries. But he and his wife were very gracious to welcome me to Sussex Drive up in Canada, the official residence in April, and he really is a statesman of the first water. We all know that that's not really why he's here. He's coming to check up on his daughter Caroline, who's at Harvard. And Mr. Prime Minister, if I could just leave you with one thought. I spent 7 years at this university, 4 at the college, 3 at the law school. They were 7 of the best years of my life. And occasionally you'll hear rumors and reports, particularly from a great distance, about the quality of life being somewhat dissolute, even at great universities like Harvard. And I'm here to tell you, Mr. Prime Minister, that based on my own experiences a generation ago, those reports are extremely well-founded. But the Prime Minister is a hero of mine. He and the presidents of Mexico and the United States, I think, have correctly foreseen the future course of economic and political development in the world, and they've set their sail By that, I think most people in this room know that mature industries in Canada, in the United States, around the world are shaking out and are resettling, and that they're being replaced by new generations of industries which are going to depend on the internationalization of our economy, and that speed of getting goods and services to market are going to replace economies of scale as being the critical determinants in success for industries which are going to compete globally. I'm certainly trying to position this poor, benighted state, one among 50, to compete in that market, and Prime Minister Mulroney has done an absolutely brilliant job through NAFTA and all of his policies in positioning our great neighbor to the north for that enterprise. We are dependent in this state on Canada very much because of proximity. I've got 60,000 jobs in this state that depend directly on trade with Canada. I know I'm not supposed to say that I've enjoyed in the distant past sporting events in Canada, because somehow that's racist and sexist and doesn't send the right message, but I can tell you, and this is politically correct, that I look forward to ever closer economic ties, Mr. Prime Minister, between our state and your wonderful country. So my hat is off to you, and I'm proud and humbled to be a part of your welcoming committee here tonight. Thank you. If I should leave at 10 minutes of 9 to attend a reception for a Chinese delegation, it's not because of disagreement with anything the Prime Minister has said. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you, Bill.
Another introduction of somebody who's well known to people here and a good friend of this school. Again, the unimportant parts first. The senior senator from the state of Massachusetts, been a senator from Massachusetts for 30 years, a graduate of Harvard College, a founder of the Institute of Politics, has served on its senior advisory committee, a staunch supporter of the Institute and of this school, and I'm delighted to say a warm personal friend, the senior senator from the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, Ted Kennedy.
Thank you very much. Let me say I'm, first of all, honored to be here with Governor Weld. I just want to reassure our Canadian friends of one thing: there's no truth to the rumor that Governor Weld intends to challenge Prime Minister Mulroney for re-election. I want to thank Al Carnesale for that warm introduction. Al does an outstanding job as Dean of the School of Government, and I know that my brother would be proud of all that Al has done here. And I also want to commend Hale Campion, and I wish that she could be here this evening. She does an excellent job as the director of the ARCO Forum, and this auspicious evening just proves it once again. It's said that universities are such great storehouses of learning because every entering student brings a little knowledge in, and no graduating student ever takes any out. But that's not true at Harvard, and certainly not true at the Institute of Politics, whose purpose is to use the university as a forum for political debate and to help elected officials serve the people more effectively. So it is a special honor for me to be here this evening to introduce one of the ablest politicians of our time, a good friend and good neighbor, the Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney. I also want to recognize Mila and Caroline Mulroney. Caroline is a student here at Harvard and a member of the Institute Student Advisory Committee. Let me also acknowledge one other honored guest, Canada's ambassador to the United States, Derek Burney. We're delighted to have him here this evening as well. There is a famous line about Canada in the Goldie Hawn movie Protocol. She is working for the protocol office at the State Department, and at a reception one evening, she is asked if she has traveled outside of the United States. She says, "I was in Canada once, but that doesn't really count because it's like attached. In a sense, that line capsulizes the best and the worst about our relations with Canada. We are attached in many worthwhile ways, especially the strong ties of friendship that bind us together. Probably no two nations in the history of the world have shared a peaceful border for so long. As President Kennedy said in his speech to the Canadian Parliament in 1961, geography has made us neighbors, history has made us friends, economics has made us partners, and necessity has made us allies. And then my brother added, those whom nature hath so joined together, let no man put asunder. Too often, though, we take Canada for granted. When the United States sends an honor guard to the World Series, we should at least know how to fly the Canadian flag right side up. That's not hard to do since the flag has a maple leaf on it. Canada has many things to teach us, such as how to run a healthcare system, and this year they even taught us something about playing baseball. There are differences as well, including politics. Canada is one of the few countries, for example, in which I might be considered a conservative. Which brings me to my favorite conservative Prime Minister, Brian Mulroney. Actually, the full name of his party is the Progressive Conservative Party, which may explain why he has so many friends in America who are Democrats. We like the first half of his party, and we give the second half the benefit of the doubt. As a matter of fact, I work with a lot of conservatives in the Senate. If they were Canadians, they would have to call themselves the Reactionary Conservative Party. Perhaps Brian Mulroney's big tent is big enough for all of us. After an outstanding career of service in both the public and private sector, Brian became leader of his party in 1983 and Prime Minister in 1984. He also has something in common with President-elect Clinton. He likes to tell about how, as a young man growing up in Canada, his life was touched and his career was influenced by President Kennedy. So in a sense, his visit here to this school of government is renewing an old tie. Years from now, the most important thing historians may write about the Prime Minister is that he was not afraid to make the tough decisions, even when those decisions were unpopular. His proposals for constitutional reform were a courageous effort to deal with one of the most challenging issues facing any multi-ethnic society: how to make diversity work for democracy, not against it. His leadership was instrumental in creating the free trade agreement between our two countries that is now being extended to all of North America. He also led the way in seeking urgent and far-reaching action against the environmental damage caused by acid rain. That leadership in turn led to our own Clean Air Act, which will mean a healthier environment for future generations. In the area of human rights, Prime Minister Mulroney has been a leader in the fight against apartheid in South Africa, and he skillfully encouraged other nations in the British Commonwealth to take a strong position too. No one underestimates the difficulty of reconciling the competing political interests that have tended to be so diverse in Canada in recent years. And when President Kennedy was writing profiles in courage, he was thinking of leaders like our guest of honor tonight. It is a privilege to introduce him now, the Prime Minister of Canada, Brian Mulroney.
Mr. Chairman and Senator and Governor and distinguished guests, Ambassador, and ladies and gentlemen. As the Senator has indicated, Canada and the United States have indeed had a uniquely peaceful relationship. In fact, there really hasn't been a shot fired over the border in anger in 180 years. That goes all the way back, as Ken Galbraith knows, all the way back to the War of 1812. Now, the War of 1812 was important. Not earth-shattering, but important. In the War of 1812, we captured Detroit. And we gave it back. Well, Senator Kennedy and I were talking a little earlier tonight, and the governor and I earlier today, about the tie-in between foreign policy and politics. And with the things going on in Little Rock, some people seem to think that foreign policy, which we'll talk about briefly tonight, takes place in a vacuum, unrelated to the hard realities of politics. And I'm reminded of something that really brought this reality down to earth. And it happened in 1968, and it involved Bobby Kennedy. He was campaigning for the presidency of the United States, and his aircraft touched down in Iowa. And Johnny Apple of the New York Times came up to a fellow by the name of William Vanden Heuvel, who had been part of Senator Kennedy's staff. And Apple said to him on the tarmac, "Mr. Vanden Heuvel, can I ask you a question?" He said, "Sure." He said, "You know, I always thought, before I got to see you, that you were a rich, successful lawyer and businessman from New York." And Vanden Heuvel said, "Well, what's changed?" Well, he said, "I've been watching you for 3 weeks, and up and down the plane and around tarmacs, all you're doing is walking around with Bobby Kennedy's dog, Brumus." He said, "Your responsibility is to look after the dog." And Vanden Heuvel said, "Mr. Apple, you got it all wrong. That might look like a dog to you, but it looks like an embassy to me." So much for highfalutin foreign policy. Well, I'm honored by your invitation and deeply touched by Senator Kennedy's generous introduction. For 30 years, Ted Kennedy has served his Commonwealth and his country with devotion and distinction. He has always had the courage to sail against the wind. He has always held for those who have been less privileged than himself, for those who dream of better housing and better health care and better education and better jobs and better training and a better life for their children. In a large and a lasting way, Senator Kennedy and his family have elevated public service as an honorable calling and inspired generations of young people in my country and elsewhere around the world to offer themselves for public service. Theodore White could have been thinking of all of us when he wrote of John and Robert Kennedy when both were tragically gone. Their voices mingle still in my memory, ringing at a score of street corners, the high-pitched tenor of timbre of sound, so much alike. We recall their grace and their wit, and most of all, their political courage, to do things not because they were easy, but because they were right, not for their popularity in the short term, but for their country in the long term. Their words are graven in stone on a hillside in Virginia. Their accomplishments endure in the history of America, and their memory lives on in the hearts of people around the world. They are remembered above all for making a positive difference, which in the end is the basic test of public life. The fundamental goal of government is to make a better world, a world that is safe from war and safe for democracy. And may I say that in this regard, in modern history of the United States, no family has made a greater contribution to these noble goals than the Kennedy family of Massachusetts. For 40 years, the United States and the Soviet Union were the world's two superpowers, the leaders of the West and East, of NATO and the Warsaw Pact, the keepers, in President Kennedy's own words, of a hard and a bitter peace. And then, in 1985, there came to power in the Kremlin a man named Mikhail Gorbachev, who questioned the assumptions of the Soviet system, ended the arms race and ultimately the Cold War, disbanded the East Bloc, the Warsaw Pact, and finally, and somehow, the tyranny of the Soviet Federation itself. Sitting across a conference table from Mr. Gorbachev in a private meeting in the Kremlin, just hours after he assumed office in March of 1985, I would never have thought it possible. Flanked as he was by Andrei Gromyko on his right and his chief of staff on his left, he was alone apart from that. This new leader of the Soviet Union spoke to me with confidence of the future, but gave precious few indications of the convulsive changes he was about to unleash, both in respect of the Soviet Union and the world. For Canada and the United States, the post-Cold War world offers unique opportunities now and daunting challenges. We begin from a common heritage of democratic traditions and a common defense of liberty. There are reminders of that from the trenches of one war to the beaches of the next, places inscribed in the history of valor where Canadians and Americans have stood together, where Canadians and Americans have died together in the defense of freedom and liberty. The reality is that President-elect Clinton will be inheriting a much more different world from George Bush than the one President Kennedy inherited from Dwight Eisenhower. Within the last few years, the Berlin Wall fell and Germany was reunified. A trade unionist from Gdansk became president of Poland, and a dissident poet sat in the castle of Prague as communist regimes fell like dominoes across Central and Eastern Europe. And in the second Russian Revolution, the people of Moscow made a human wall around their parliament, and tanks that had crushed each stirring of liberty in the past now dared not cross. But these astonishing events would never have occurred without America's leadership of the Western Alliance and the support of its allies. Through these crucial years, Presidents Reagan and Bush ensured that America stood strong, and through NATO, the West stood united, just as we now stand ready to assist the people of Russia and the former Soviet republics in the nurturing of their new democratic and free market institutions. The United States of America is the world's only superpower and remains the most powerful motor of global growth. The world counts on American leadership for peace and prosperity. For generations, the United States and Canada have made common cause for both. And yet, there are defining differences between us in our place in the world and, for obvious reasons, our differing outlooks on it. I suppose that our respective roles in the world have been shaped by the simple fact that because of significant population and other disparities, we've had different responsibilities in it, and largely as a consequence, often a different view of it. And sometimes it's a matter really of how we as individuals differently see ourselves. We've built a standard of living in Canada that is second only to that of the United States, and a quality of life that's second to none, according to the United Nations Human Development Index, which this year ranks Canada #1 in the entire world among the 160 nations, members of the United Nations, when the survey was done. For example, the kind of universal, comprehensive health care system for which Senator Kennedy has been fighting for almost 30 years has been a fact of life in Canada for almost 30 years. The means by which we sustain such values, the manner in which we nourish our vision of our country, are also enunciated in our foreign policy. The foreign policy of our government has been one of continuity of values amidst drastically changing world events. We have tried to build on the four cornerstones of Canadian foreign policy: multilateralism, including collective security, trade liberalization, human rights, and the environment. In each of these policy areas, the Canadian view is often complementary to, but sometimes very different from, that articulated by the United States of America. Let me illustrate where we frankly disagreed in some areas and point to others where we've worked through our differences in the interests of both of our countries. Canada had no hesitation last month in breaking with the United States in a United Nations vote on the issue of Cuba. Successive Canadian governments for the last 30 years have recognized the present Cuban regime, which is not to say that we in any way endorse its ideology or approve of its conduct within the hemisphere or its activities elsewhere in the world. The recently enacted Cuban Democracy Act, passed by Congress and signed by the President, forbidding American corporations anywhere in the world from trading with Cuba, is an assertion of extraterritoriality that Canada rejects. Companies operating in Canada will be governed by Canadian law alone, period. That's what the United Nations voted on 2 weeks ago, and that's why we supported the resolution. Canada indicated before the Earth Summit in Rio that we would be signing the Biodiversity Accord as well as the Atmospheric Agreement on Global Warming. In that, we differed very strongly from the United States administration. In fact, our position was much closer to the opposition view then being put forward by Senator Al Gore, who was with us at the Rio conference. And I suppose that to follow the logic of some of our critics back home, that had the Democrats been in office in June, we would be accused of being lapdogs for the Americans. Because we would have been agreeing with an American position rather than defending a quite different Canadian one. So Canada's signal on the Biodiversity Accord gave it significant impetus. And so why did we support it? Well, because it was in our national interest to do so. Because we consider that biodiversity is an important aspect of sustainable development and the protection of the environment for our children and their children. And because, quite simply, it covers vital dimensions of life on Earth. Since 1985, as the Senator has referred to, Canada had the opportunity of leading the fight among the 49 Commonwealth nations and was out front in the United Nations in favor of putting strong economic sanctions on the apartheid regime in South Africa. The U.S. administration at that time held that sanctions would not work, but they did. And when Nelson Mandela, free at last, came to Canada and spoke to our Parliament, he thanked the Canadian people for their strong leadership and support on this vital question and said that economic sanctions had been indispensable in the process of opposing apartheid. In this, the government of Canada was guided by a principle best articulated, I thought, by Robert Kennedy when he spoke in Cape Town in 1966. Each time a man stands up for an ideal or acts to improve the lot of others or strikes out against injustice, he said, he sends a tiny ripple of hope, and crossing each other from a million different centers of energy and daring, those ripples build a current which can sweep away the mightiest walls of oppression and the mightiest walls of resistance. And so they did. And clearly, there are important areas in the conduct of foreign policy where we have our fundamental differences, and always will. But most of the time, on most issues, we work through our differences in our own interests and in our mutual interests. As Prime Minister, I've placed a premium on good relations between Canada and the United States of America. I've been criticized for this in some quarters in Canada by people who tend to equate civility with subservience in foreign affairs. Their view seems to be that independence in foreign policy is principally measured by the extent to which we can disagree with the United States. And the more churlish the disagreement, the more different and the more independent. Well, in fact, Canadians know that the real quality of foreign policy is measured by effect, not differentiation. The quality of Canadian foreign policy depends, therefore, on the principles we seek to defend, the commitments we are able to make, and the objectives we are obliged to meet. What we do is determined by what we can do. The importance of one country to the other between Canada and the United States in strategic, economic, and geographic terms is self-evident, or it should be. On your northern border is your closest defense partner, your largest trading partner, and your best friend. It shouldn't be surprising that Canada and the United States, two of the greatest democracies in the history of the world, have for generations pursued common objectives on the overriding issues of peace and prosperity. After all, we have much in common. You have the Stanley Cup, and we have the World Series. Canada gave John Kenneth Galbraith to Harvard, and you loaned us Michael Porter. But our fundamental values of freedom and equality are precious, obviously, to both countries, and our people are courageous people. Our sons and daughters have fought bravely to defend them. We are both modern trading nations dependent for our prosperity on economic stability, open markets, and clear, clean rules of the game. And so, Canada and the United States have worked together in order to create a liberalized world trading system, from Bretton Woods to the creation of the GATT, from the free trade agreement between Canada and the United States to NAFTA, which now links Mexico in a vast trading arrangement. Canadians, like Americans, have supported these policies not because they satisfied somebody else's agenda or interests, but because they reflected our own and your own. We know that in order to be truly effective, we must often work in concert with others, including the United States, whether in trade, in support of human rights, or in seeking greater stability in the world. That's the reality of global politics for Canada. It's not a question of the Americans are doing this, so we must do the opposite. Rather, the question is simply and at all times, what is in the national interest of Canada? And surely, the criterion for success is not shouting at Americans, but speaking with them. Slogans are one thing, and solutions are quite another. Because Canada and the United States have together shown leadership in the cornerstone issues of foreign policy. As founding members of the United Nations in San Francisco, we are strong believers in multilateralism and have sought to strengthen this indispensable instrument of world peace. As partners in the creation of both NATO and NORAD, we are the architects of the concepts of collective security. And that is also why Canada, under our government, joined the Organization of American States, because we believe we can only play a constructive role in the affairs of this hemisphere if we are at the table to defend our position in respect to them. In the OAS, far from being an echo of the United States, we are considered, as a G7 industrialized nation, a welcome counterbalance by some to the preponderant weight of the Americans on some issues, such as Haiti. Canada brings the particular perspective of a French-speaking country that is also a founding member of La Francophonie, and which has seen blossom in Montreal, the third largest community of Haitians outside of Port-au-Prince. As you know, Haiti is an island of poverty and oppression, and Canada's assistance is strongly linked to human rights. The experiment with democracy cannot be allowed to be extinguished in Haiti. It is a profound irony, I think it is a profound irony, that nations can now reach around the world to extend democracy, and yet we have not been successful in reaching around the corner to help Haiti resolve this fundamental challenge. Il est effectivement cruellement ironique qu'au moment où l'on déplore les efforts pour faire avancer la démocratie à l'autre bout du monde, on n'arrive pas à implanter avec succès en Haïti tout près de chez nous les instruments de démocratie. Et donc le Canada travaillera avec les Nations unies, les États-Unis, l'Organisation des États américains et d'autres organismes au niveau international pour permettre à la démocratie de vivre sur cette terre durement éprouvée. And so our history as Senator Kennedy will tell you, we Irish learned the French early. We are both fluently bilingual, as is the governor. Well, our history and our traditions are why we instinctively distrust unilateralism, whether in trade or security issues. Not every country has the means or the might to be a superpower, but principal middle powers like Canada can often be the only ones that can help find a tenable middle ground, which is known as home as honorable compromise. In the post-Cold War context, America, you know, is not alone. You're not alone in reassessing your role and responsibilities in the world. But as current events remind us, there is much that we can do and much that we must now do together. America's economic strength and military outreach give you a role and responsibilities unique among the nations of the world. Just as the United Nations counted on United States leadership to enforce the territorial integrity of Kuwait, so does the United Nations now count on America to help lead its forces in Somalia so that relief and humanitarian assistance can get through to a country whose people are besieged by war even as they perish of hunger. As it did in the Gulf War, Canada has joined the UN-led efforts. We have dispatched a battalion of 900 ground troops to Somalia, along with 350 supporting naval personnel on military vessels that have already arrived in the areas of operation. Peacekeeping is a hazardous but familiar role to Canadian forces. Peacemaking is new and even more dangerous duty for American forces as well as our own. Canada has served in every United Nations peacekeeping mission but one since 1956, and more than 80,000 Canadians have worn the blue beret in 20 peacekeeping operations from Cyprus to the Sinai, from Central America to Cambodia. Lester Pearson, who won the Nobel Peace Prize for his peacekeeping initiative in the Suez, explained its purposes in his Nobel address when he said, "The best defense of peace is not power, but the removal of the causes of war, and international agreements which will put peace on a stronger foundation than the utter terror of destruction." And that's why we are joining the United Nations operation in Somalia. And that's why we have 2,400 troops tonight in the former Yugoslav republics. Sadly, a very dangerous place. With less than 1% of the world's population, Canada has 10% of all of the world's peacekeeping forces. Our purpose is humanitarian. Together, we seek a better and a safer world. The brave men and women of both of our countries, the United States and Canada, are answering the call because that's what they've been trained for. But you know, they didn't sign up with the idea of spending Christmas in Somalia or Bosnia, but they are the instruments of foreign policy that holds for a more generous and peaceful world. The young Americans and Canadians who are there or who are en route to Somalia go tonight with our best wishes and our prayers for a successful mission and a safe return. Trade is another vital area of Canadian foreign policy. Canada trades twice as much of its output as does Japan, and more than 2.5 times as much as the United States. Trade is our lifeblood and our most important trading relationship by far, as Governor Weld has indicated, is with the United States. 3/4 of all of our trade is with the U.S., and 1/5 of all of American exports go to Canada. You sell almost twice as much to Canada as you do to Japan. One province in Canada, Ontario, does more business with you than Japan. I don't want to offend the Japanese, but that'll put it in some perspective. And you sell more to Canada than you do to Germany, France, Italy, and the United Kingdom combined. Our $240 billion of two-way trade in goods and services constitutes by far the largest commercial relationship between two nations in the history of the world. Over 2 million jobs in each country depend directly on trade with the other. In 1988, we strengthened our trading partnership with the Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement. On all of the available evidence, the Free Trade Agreement has been a win-win for both countries. Trade from both countries to both countries has increased significantly, even at a time when our economies were struggling. Canadian exports to the United States have increased by $16 billion during that period. Our merchandise trade surplus with the United States has increased, and a chronic foreign direct investment deficit has become a surplus. And the fascinating thing about our trade, of such extraordinary complexity and dimensions, is that at the end of the year, we are in rough commercial balance, proving that two advanced and technologically sophisticated countries trading at a rate unknown in the history of world trade can, if they are free and fair traders, help enrich each other's populations while contributing to a more prosperous world. And that is what Canada and the United States do for the world. And so now, after the Free Trade Agreement comes NAFTA, the North American Free Trade Agreement, which will create a powerful continental market of 360 million people involving the United States, Canada, and Mexico. And I can tell you that it won't be long before the Venezuelans and Chile and other Latin American nations will be knocking on our door to take advantage of this historic initiative. Next week, President Bush and President Salinas and I will sign the NAFTA agreement, and the process of obtaining legislative approval will begin in all three countries. Just the prospect of NAFTA has seen Canadian exports to Mexico double in the first 5 months of this year over the same period last year. Now, if I could do that with my own political popularity, I would trade my way to re-election. President Clinton, elect Clinton, has indicated that ratifying the NAFTA will be one of his priorities during his first 100 days of his presidency. In a conversation after the election, he reminded me that he had been a strong supporter of the Free Trade Agreement while governor of Arkansas, and a strong promoter of it in the United States. President-elect Clinton's concerns on adjustment present no problems for Canada, and his concerns for labor and environmental standards, very important considerations, will be addressed in a constructive manner. In over 8 years as Prime Minister of Canada, I have worked closely with two American presidents, and I look forward to working effectively with President-elect Clinton. I also look forward to continuing our strong bipartisan relationship with the leadership on Capitol Hill. Canada's productive partnership with the United States very much includes our relationship with the congressional leaders of both parties. The President-elect has said that he plans to focus like a laser beam on the economy. Well, that's good news for Canada. An America bounding with confidence out of a recession into recovery can only mean increased prosperity for us as your largest trading partners, with the double dividend of a lessening of the winds of protectionism that have blown during the last 2 very difficult years for both of our economies. I know as well that President-elect Clinton is solemnly aware of the heavy and unique responsibility in world affairs that as President of the United States will soon fall on his shoulders. He will find that America's true friends, like Canada, are there for the long haul and the heavy lifting. I see 4 fundamental challenges for the U.S. and Canada in the post-Cold War world. First, we must bolster the capacity of the United Nations to respond to humanitarian and political emergencies. This means structural changes for the institution itself. The mandate reform as the World demands scope for peacekeeping as the higher form of peacemaking and a new attitude to traditional definitions of sovereignty. No longer will we be able to stay out and say we can't go in there because somebody has defined its territorial integrity this way. They're allowed to slaughter people within their bounds. People are allowed to starve to death, and we're not allowed to get in there simply because somebody has called this a sovereign country. This is changing, and this must change. It also requires changes to the funding provisions for the United Nations. All nations must pay their dues on time. I'm not referring to anybody in particular, but it was just a thought that occurred to me as I was coming over here. You know, I don't like the Secretary General of the United Nations having to go around with a tin cup asking for assistance. I'll tell you what the policy of my government is, that I send our ambassador in there on the 1st of January every year with a check paying in advance all of our bills and assessments for the next fiscal year, and I would urge all administrations in the world to do this for the United Nations. Second, we cannot be overwhelmed by immediate demands of domestic challenges. As politicians, we must, of course, respond first and foremost to the needs of our own people. But you know, to think that we can build a wall between domestic demands and international obligations, particularly the demands on the international leadership of the United States, is unrealistic, and it flies in the face of history. If we try to avoid the international problems crowding the agenda today, if we drift into isolationist attitudes, we will only compound the difficulties that we will be obliged to face tomorrow. Economic security is a powerful watchword for the future, but it should not become a mask of convenience for even more exotic forms, more esoteric forms of protectionism. Success in trade negotiations is crucial, absolutely crucial, to a global economic recovery. Higher levels of commitment to more open trade and investment flows are as fundamental to prosperity as stability is to peace. And finally, the threat of nuclear proliferation has ironically increased as a result of the end of the Cold War. The disciplines imposed by two tightly knit alliances are eroding. NATO on the one side and the Warsaw Pact on the other. There was pretty tight discipline imposed on all members of these alliances, and this is slowly beginning to erode. But it's leaving, I can tell you, a lot of loose weaponry and technology around, and more than a few customers. I get nervous when somebody in the same sentence mentions the availability of nuclear technology and Mr. Gaddafi. This is not my idea of peace, and I think we have to be conscious of that reality. And we need higher levels of discipline to fill the vacuum. We need more resources and more certainty in inspection and surveillance to ensure stability. And these are the big issues, I think, and the world counts on America's continued leadership under your young and vigorous and new president. As friends, we as Canadians wish him well. As a colleague, I wish him Godspeed. And as Prime Minister of Canada, I am confident that the relationship between our two countries will always be, as Winston Churchill described it more than a half a century ago, an example to every country and a pattern for the future of the entire world. Thank you all.
That was great. That was great. I'm going to go save my marriage for the Prime Minister.
Thank you very much.
Ladies and gentlemen, we're indeed fortunate. The Prime Minister has agreed to answer some questions. Let me point out to you that there are microphones located, one here, one there, and one on the floor right here. So if you please come to the microphones, and we'll try and work our way around the room. Mr. Prime Minister.
Thank you. Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. Marco Simanovic. I'm actually from Ottawa, Canada, studying here at the school. You focused quite a bit on foreign policy in your speech here, your discourse, which I found very encouraging. I'm a Croatian. My parents are from Bosnia, and of course everyone is very aware of the situation there. I think one of the unfortunate things of this whole effect has been the demonizing of the Serbian people through this whole thing, which I think is completely wrong. At the same time, you've talked about the change in the whole attitude towards sovereignty. What exactly, in concrete terms, are you proposing for Bosnia, whose government itself, the official government of Bosnia, is asking for help, asking for arms, and yet people are not doing anything, it seems? Well, I shouldn't say anything, but the slaughter continues.
Well, I think we were the first industrialized country to urge the United Nations a year and a half ago to get off the dime and to get over there. And we volunteered forces, at least to begin the peacekeeping initiatives. And Canadians wound up there with General Lou Mackenzie in charge of the initial operations of the United Nations in Sarajevo. And the Canadians were in that leadership position for some months until the rotation began. We felt that we had to do something, and we began with a peacekeeping initiative. But it turns out that there was, of course, no peace to keep. And I think that the only alternative is another one that we discussed then, is peacemaking. And peacemaking requires the Secretary General of the United States to submit to the Security Council a resolution calling upon the United Nations to ensure the cessation of hostilities in Bosnia-Herzegovina, using all of the instruments available to us to do this. We've done it before. It was done, the Korean initiative was undertaken under the aegis of the United Nations. Under the aegis of the United Nations. The events in the Gulf were done under the aegis of the United Nations. 29 nations came together and put an end to aggression at that time by Saddam Hussein. I think that I can tell you that Canada would strongly support an initiative designed by the United Nations and only under the aegis of the Security Council that would be designed to not keep the peace in Bosnia. We know that can't be done. Make the peace.
Are you proposing
in
military
Bosnia.
intervention?
I am proposing that the United Nations take those actions that we've taken elsewhere, because it's the only thing that works.
Thank you.
Mr. Prime Minister, my name is Andrea Kwong, and I'm an undergraduate here at the college. And as students, I and many others have a great deal of concern about the environmentally destructive and human rights impacts of the James Bay Hydroelectric Power Project in northern Quebec. And I have a question for you regarding the contracts negotiated between Hydro-Quebec and aluminum and other metal smelters for electricity, for below-cost electricity from the James Bay projects. The cheap electricity and other federal and provincial subsidies under the Norsk Metals contract were greatly reduced after the United States Department of Commerce review. Will the Canadian government divulge the terms of the other 13 secret aluminum contracts so that they can be brought into line with the principle of free trade?
Well, apart from that, how are you?
but seriously.
Well, absolutely. The development of hydroelectric resources, of course, must be done in northern Quebec, consistent with the rights of the native peoples. There's a James Bay Agreement, which was negotiated by the government of Quebec with the Cree, which allowed for the consent for the development of James Bay 1. And there are ongoing negotiations with them and environmental impact studies, on which there will be hearings again next year, which all participants, including people from the United States, if they so wish, can come up and make their objections known. We have a policy of sustainable development in Canada, where environmental projects will only be undertaken provided they respect the laws in regard to the environment. Now, you can have different points of view, but I think that you'll find that the government of Quebec and the people of Quebec have been very sensitive to and responsive to the needs of the native peoples in respect of the development, but obviously there may be room for improvement. And the government of Canada and the government of the province of Quebec would only be interested in proceeding with these great developments to the extent that they, A, respect native rights. One of the things parenthetically we tried to do in our constitutional proposals, that native rights are fully protected, but the development is consonant with respect for the environment. Now, it's a provincial jurisdiction. It's not a matter of under federal jurisdiction, but I can tell you that that's the position of the Premier of Quebec, whose record, I should tell you, Robert Bourassa, whose record in defense of minority rights and in defense of Aboriginal rights, I'm sorry, is a very key one, is a very good one. And so I'll be happy to bear in mind what you say, but I can tell you that the process is open, and we'll only proceed if it meets those values. Thank you very much.
And about the aluminum contracts?
Well, look at you know more about than I do. In terms, they can't be secret if you've got them. But I'll be, as I say, any development contracts are entered into between the provincial government and, say, the Aluminum Company of Canada or some other aluminum, not with the federal government. They are supposed to make sure that those contracts respect the provisions of our international treaties. If they do not, and they do, we're satisfied they do, but if they do not, they'll be struck down by the courts.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry. Yes, sir.
Hello, Mr. Prime Minister. My name is Jeremy Hawkinstein. I'm a Quebecer who's currently an undergraduate at the college. I come from an English-speaking family whose parents and grandparents have lived our lives under great political uncertainty, under the threat of Quebec independence, and whose language has been banned most of my life from public signs. My parents think that I would be silly to return to the province and live my life under this great uncertainty. I was wondering what you would say to people like myself and our generation of English Quebecers on why we should return and dedicate ourselves to the province. I'm sorry to ask you about this family issue in such a public setting, but I don't get many opportunities.
I'd say come home. Come on back and help Quebec and help Canada make a better province and a better country. I share some of the concerns that you've just expressed. No province or no area of the world can be insensitive to the economic and cultural realities around them, because the province of Quebec has taken some actions in respect of signage on outdoor signs in Quebec. It's caused, quite understandably, a lot of grief for a lot of people, your parents, for example, and you. No one has indicated that this is for forever. The more people like you who come back, the quicker it'll be changed.
Thank you.
Thank you. Sorry.
Prime Minister, my name's Erin O'Connor. Comme vous, je viens du Québec, du Gatineau, and I also am from Toronto, Ontario. I'm a student here at the Kennedy School. Rumor has it, sir, that you will resign soon. And I would like to ask you how you feel about resigning given the current state of the country. There is despite all the positive things about Canada, mammoth unemployment, we have a devastated manufacturing sector, we have a newly impoverished class of white-collar workers, we have a depressingly massive deficit that my generation has to pay off, and we have the constitutional paralysis that may tear your home province and mine out of Confederation. How will you like being recorded in the history books as the man who oversaw the dismantling of the country, both financially and constitutionally? How, sir, do you like your legacy? If I may point out, part of the reason that Canada has so many positive attributes is due to the healthy level of political debate that goes on.
For our American friends, I should tell you, this is one of the nicest things I've heard lately. Makes me wish I was back in the House of Commons. Well, let's just deal with some of the realities. The deficit has been reduced by 40% as a percentage of GDP since 1984. Canada will lead according to the IMF, Canada will lead the G7 countries in 1993 in terms of employment growth. Canada will lead in terms of real growth, and Canada has the lowest inflation rate this year in the industrialized world, 1.3%. It is true that our unemployment rate, which I inherited, by the way, at 11.8.
Many years ago, sir.
Well, no, just a second. Just a second. We brought it down. We brought it from 11.8% down to 7.3%, and in the which by our standards our standards traditionally have been higher than the United States in terms of rates of unemployment. And so we were doing well until we got caught in this worldwide recession that has affected us all. And so I think that on an objective basis, be it the OECD, which has ranked Canada in that way, the IMF, which has just come out with its report, you may have missed it, with regard to this data, and as I've indicated in my remarks, the United Nations, which having surveyed 160 nations in the world, pursuant to 5 important objective criteria, concluded that Canada was the #1 nation in the entire world in which to live. You've been away too long.
I can't wait to get back. Thank you.
So you should come back. But Merry Christmas to you.
Do we have a friendly question?
Yeah. That was a friendly question.
My name is Kambiz Abdi. I'm an Iranian by origin. I'm a graduate student at the Harvard College. My question has 2 parts. The first part is you spoke about the nuclear arms in the hands of the madmen. As the reports have been indicating the past few months, the Iranian regime has been looking and trying very hard to get their hands on a nuclear warhead or to be able to capability of the nuclear arms. And as we saw with the Iraqis, after the war, we had to go in and dismantle all their systems. And as of this moment, the Iranians have been very, very active on the international market to purchase all kinds of armaments and nuclear-related materials and high technology from the West. Is it prudent for the UN to go ahead and have the same sanctions that we have on Iraq right now, to impose on Iran before we have to go to war again for stopping an oppressive regime in Iran to become another Iraqis, to be a menace to the world war mongering?
Well, I think you're dealing with, in specifics, the problem that I raised about the proliferation of nuclear weaponry and the manner in which it can fall into hands that we would call, how would we best call, unreliable hands. I think that that this has to, the proliferation not only of nuclear technology and the absence of controls, but the manner in which some industrialized states seem to delight in the sale of weaponry itself is puzzling to a lot of Canadians and very disturbing the international climate. The idea that you make a couple of fast bucks by selling weapons of destruction is not what technologically advanced nations should be doing. They should be developing environmental technologies and selling those rather than perhaps selling some of those weapons.
Exactly.
But the only way that we are going to deal with this is through the United Nations ensuring the kind of register, rules, and responsibilities in regard to the control of nuclear assets. And then, if there's violations, shutting them down. The only way you shut them down is the way it was done in the Gulf, pursuant to the United Nations Security Council resolutions. This is, people seem to be pointing, oh, well, things are bad in Russia, and they have no cash, and so they're going to start disposing, some of the Russian former Soviet republics will start disposing of nuclear weapons to other countries. It's not just the problem of nuclear instability in the former Soviet Union. It's in some of the areas to which you've just made reference, and the United Nations urgently has got to shut this down. And I thank you for your point.
One question per customer. We have more customers than we have time.
Bonsoir, Monsieur le Premier ministre. Je crois qu'il faut partir de son pays pour savoir quel bonheur c'est de vivre au Canada. That said, my name is Stephanie Coyles, and I'm here in my first year at the Kennedy School. Unfortunately, I am going to take you back to domestic policy because it is of what is primary interest to me. Rumor around Ottawa has it that part of your policy platform for the next election will include a guaranteed annual income. I have two questions about this policy. The first is this policy was first discussed in the late 60s and early 70s. It was discarded at that time as unfeasible. I'm wondering why you believe that this is the policy to cure our ills in the 1990s, especially when the federal government current budget has to pay 40 cents of every dollar towards our deficit. The second question would be, since a high proportion of our welfare system is administered by the provinces, how do you propose to negotiate the needed cooperation to achieve administrative efficiency in such a program in this divided political atmosphere after the failure of the Constitution? And my final question would be, is if I was covering you making this announcement, would I be wearing a spring coat, a winter coat, or a summer coat?
You would be wearing out your patience. You see, I have to point out now you've got, you have, and for the Americans and the non-Canadians here, I point out to you affectionately what is known in Canada as a bifurcation of thought. The first young lady stands up and asks me when I'm going to resign. The second one says she's heard I'm going to run again and I'm going to run on this platform. Now you two get together. And I think that you can safely assume that we will not be running on that platform.
That's like Mario Cuomo.
And I'm sorry you read it in some paper, but no, we won't be running on that.
Well, that's a disappointment then.
Well, it may be a disappointment, but I don't know how I can disappoint both of you. Thank you very much, but we'll be running on a pretty sound policy of economic renewal and social justice. But I don't think that the GAI will be one of them.
Yes, Mr. Prime Minister, recent graduate of the college, currently a public school teacher before I go to graduate school. Needless to say, there are acute problems around the world, India, Germany, former Yugoslavia, regarding multiculturalism. What progress is Canada making pursuing multicultural policy? What do you perceive to be the most difficult problem in this area?
We're making mixed progress in multiculturalism. I think that the objective is noble, which is the respect for individual differences of visible minorities and a respect for people of different cultural backgrounds to come to Canada and not lose that in a melting pot. And that was the objective. What is in the minds of some Canadians is that what the policy enacted in the early 1970s has done and maintained by successive governments is that it has encouraged those views to the point where they tend to vitiate a larger feeling of nationhood, of unity. Arthur Schlesinger did about 6 months ago, in regard to an important piece of work he did a series of op-ed pieces on this matter and how it is now coming into the United States, and I was struck by the similarities in the problems that you will be encountering as we did in Canada. And it's hard to find the middle ground where you, on the one hand, encourage people to retain their identities and their cultural roots and the strength of their communities, and yet integrate them seamlessly into a united nation. And so I'd have to tell you that our experience has been, well, mixed, and the results, the jury is still out on the value of that kind of formal policy.
Mr. Prime Minister, my name is Christine Fukumura and I'm studying from Winnipeg, Canada. You mentioned the solving of domestic problems, including unemployment being one of our big ones at the moment. How do you plan to resolve that with the introduction of the legislation that would cut off unemployment insurance for those employees who are fired or quit their jobs?
Well, I think that's, I like to point out that unemployment insurance has risen to be one of the most significant expenditures in Canada at the federal level. And one of the reasons was because people would quit their jobs for no reason, factor this into an unemployment insurance plan and move on, draw unemployment insurance, and then move on, then quit their jobs and move on. It was kind of like an ongoing social program. If someone is fired from a job or quits a job, for example, because of sexual harassment or something like that, she keeps the unemployment insurance. There are all kinds of protections built into the system to ensure that nobody is in any way deprived of his or her rights. But it seems to us that in a country that does have economic problems, all industrialized countries around the world do, we all have deficits and we all have debts. But you can't justify the use of a taxpayer's money today, because it's paid for by the taxpayers, by allowing somebody to quit a job simply to go on unemployment insurance. And so all we're trying to do is tighten it up so that there is more money, more resources available for the people who need it. And anything else trivializes the true problems of the poor and those less well off in Canada. And all it is an administrative act designed to help those who need the benefits the best. Our costs are skyrocketing. We're not cutting back on the costs. The amounts are rising all the time, and they're rising at a rate greater than any transfer of federal funds to the provinces or any rate of expenditure in the federal budget. They're rising very dramatically to look after them. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm afraid I'm going to have to be the bad guy here. If we can keep the questions very brief, we'll go around each of the microphones, very brief questions, and answers as brief as you would like.
Mr. Prime Minister, let me just say that I hope you don't resign, and I want to throw you a softball question just in case. My name's Dan Markell, and I'm a sophomore at the college, and I'm also in one of your daughter's classes. And I was wondering, I'm wondering why it is that Caroline and I are both here at Harvard. That is to say, why it is that it seems to us that higher education is not a priority, a top priority in the future industrial competitiveness of Canada. Like, why is it that we have to feel that we get a better education here and not at Queen's, McGill, U of T, where they're being strapped financially and are being deprived of vital resources?
Well, you may be interested to know that Canada spends more per capita on education than any industrialized country in the world.
But we have to spend it wisely, though.
Come home and help us. This is, you know, look, there's only one Harvard, and there's one Oxford, and these are centers of extraordinary excellence, widely known around the world. And so people want to come to a Harvard for 1,000 different reasons that have got nothing to do with home in Scotland or home in Canada or home in Mexico. There are unique instruments of excellence around the world, and this happens to be one. And there's no doubt about that, and it attracts people from around the world for all kinds of good reasons. It's not a reflection on the quality of education at home in any of these countries. And I just point out to you that there was a time until recently when we were second in the OECD in terms of the amount that we affected on a per capita basis to education. We are now first in the world, which is another reason I should tell my Irish friend there, which is another reason why, in the Development Index, why Canada was chosen as what the Development Index meant in terms of education, social policy, health care, environment, and education, why Canada was deemed to be the #1 country in the world where people would like to live. And so there's always good reason to come to Harvard, but we have a pretty good system. We have an excellent system at home, and I think most people know that. And thank you very much.
We do have an excellent system at home. It actually born and bred us to bring us here to Harvard, where most of us went to undergrad in Canada. So we're very proud of that, and I'm very proud to be a Canadian. My name is Victor Dodig. I'm a first year at the Harvard Business School, and I wanted to just briefly ask you something about foreign policy. I'm proud to be a Canadian because Canada has shown leadership in foreign policy. Unfortunately, lately, maybe it hasn't shown as much leadership as many of us would have liked to have seen, particularly in Bosnia. I worked in former Yugoslavia for 2 years, and I saw the situation disintegrate for a Canadian company. And something desperately needs to be done to save the people there, no matter what ethnic background they are of. So they need military intervention. That is a fait accompli. I want to focus on the former Soviet Union and Boris Yeltsin, who right now is dangling on a string. Tonight, his defense minister went on television. The chief of the former KGB went on television to quell any fears of the army getting involved in solving the current political crisis. You, Mr. Prime Minister, were involved in April with the G24 and in promising a $24 billion aid package to Mr. Yeltsin. Mr. Yeltsin is dangling on a string. Something needs to be done very quickly. How does Canada intend to take a proactive stance and make fundamental change very quickly on the international scene through the United Nations, through the World Bank, through the IMF, and any other institutions that may be of assistance?
Well, we have tried, the United States and Canada, among others, among the G7 countries, have tried very hard to be of assistance to President Yeltsin. Canada, again, on a per capita basis, has contributed more to the redevelopment of the former Soviet Union than any country, with the exception of Germany. And Germany is #1 because the deal that Kohl cut with Gorbachev was that they were going to put up the cash if Gorbachev removed 350,000 troops from East Germany. And they had no place to put them. They had to be billeted back home. And so this cost in the neighborhood of $30 billion. So by far the largest single contributor to the restructuring of the Soviet Union is Germany on a per capita basis for obvious reasons. Moreover, Gorbachev played an indispensable role in allowing and working towards the reunification of Germany and allowing the integration of a reunited Germany in NATO. And I can tell you that there was a lot of gratitude in regard to the official German attitude, and Kohl stepped up to the plate, and the Germans made the major single contribution. The American Congress voted $24 billion. And I understand from a report from Ambassador Strauss, who's just back, that the system was only able to take in about $1 billion of the amount already voted by the United States Senate. Our money has already been put up and delivered. And some people say that we're throwing good money after bad, because there's a bottomless pit there that can't, until the economy is restructured, it can't receive these amounts of money. We tend to disagree with that. President Yeltsin is making historic change. We've got to support him at the United Nations. We've got to support them at the World Bank. We've got to support them at the IMF. And we've got to support them with our checkbooks, even in difficult economic times. And that is what we have been doing. That is what the United States has been doing. We can do more, and we will do more, because I'll tell you, if they lose Yeltsin, they're not going to like what they see in his place. And all of the talk about peace dividends and future liberalization and dealings with the republics and religious freedom and immigration and protection for the Jewish community, for example, in the Soviet Union, which was harassed for 50 years. All of the ethnic minority, all of this is now happening because of Gorbachev and Yeltsin. It is vital for our well-being, in our own selfish interests, as Americans and Canadians, that we step into this and we play a major role in helping out even more than we have. I should tell you, we have done a lot. We can do more, and we will.
Mr. Prime Minister, my name is Frida Laurent, and I'm from Haiti. I would like to say welcome to you, and I said in French, bienvenue à votre université. My question is about Haiti. I would like to hear your Canadian prospect on the current crisis in Haiti with the only legitimate government being in exile, President Aristide, given the daily massacre on the citizenry that's going on there right now, from weapons that are being supplied by other nations, since in Haiti we don't make any weapons. And also your opinion on the somewhat 250 Haitians that are being kept in isolation at Guantanamo Bay in Cuba.
Well, the second point is a part of American foreign policy, and I can't comment on that, except to say that I agree with Governor Clinton in terms of his general approach to this question. The larger question of Haiti is a tragedy. Mm-hmm. And I think that the answer is that the United States, Canada, France, and Venezuela have to blockade that island. And we've got to choke off the supplies of petroleum products to that island until the group of people who have illegally usurped control and authority from the first duly elected and democratically elected government in the history of Haiti in 200 years, until le Père Aristide, le président dûment élu, la République d'Haïti, until Aristide is returned to power in Port-au-Prince. I think that these four major countries with an interest in the region should step into this, blockade that island, and say to those who have usurped democratic authority, until you get out of there, we're going to make certain that the interests of the Haitian people are preserved. Then we've got to step in with money. The place is in a state of advanced decay and degradation, and people are dying. Not only with a loss of dignity, but they're just dying from a loss of hope every day. And I find it quite shameful that here we've got this little island off our coast and off the coast of the United States, and we're great at solving problems around the world, and we don't go around the corner to help solve this one. And that's the way we got to solve. The only thing that these guys in Port-au-Prince understand are those battleships around the island saying, until you guys take off, no, this is a no-go area.
Good.
That's what we should do.
Thank you.
Prime Minister, welcome to the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. I'm Deborah Addis, a consultant in Boston. I spend as much time as possible in Canada. Speaking of rumors, I don't mean to put you on the spot, but why not? Others have. Wall Street is buzzing with the rumor
that I'm going to resign?
No. Well, perhaps. Wall Street is buzzing with the rumor that you may be a contender for the presidency of American Express. May we? May we put that rumor to rest, or what?
Look at that. I was.
McLean said it a few weeks ago. I'm sure you were.
this is not a rumor. I thought you were going to raise the question of my overdraft. My Irish friend back there, you're worried about Canada's debt? No, look at Jimmy Robinson has done, I thought, a very good job as the chairman and CEO of American Express. I understand that the board met, according to the Wall Street Journal, that the board met a couple of weeks ago and decided they had a search committee out looking for a new CEO, and no one. No one.
Come on.
No one has approached me, but I tell you, I saw that they were paying Robinson $1.3 million. Could I leave my phone number with you?
I already have it.
Well, I'm the one that has to bring this to a close. Mr. Prime Minister, I hope you realize you may not have read the bills carefully that came for tuition, but one of the requirements is that every Canadian Prime Minister who has a daughter in school here has to appear at the Kennedy School once each semester. We're grateful to Governor Weld, to Senator Kennedy, and most of all to you, because we feel not only attached to Canada, but now to you as well. Thank you very much.